Let me start with a question. What if cybercrime was as cheap as Netflix? Okay, some of you might argue that Netflix is not absolutely cheap, but that's not the point. What if for the price of a couple of coffees per month, anyone, anywhere, could run global fraud campaigns at industrial scale? Well, what you are seeing on screen is not science fiction, it's the reality of modern cybercrime. This is the world of crime as a service, where cybercrime is no longer about lone hackers, but about platforms, subscriptions, and repeat customers. At the center of today's story is RedVDS. RedVDS was not just used by criminals, it was built for them. A subscription-based service providing disposable virtual infrastructure designed to disappear, reappear, and scale on demand. With it, attackers launched phishing campaigns, account takeovers, business email compromise, and payment diversion schemes, globally, continuously, and cheaply. And here's the part that matters. This was not some fringe operation in the shadows. It powered tens of millions of dollars in fraud, affected hundreds of thousands of organizations, and operated openly enough that it needed coordinated legal and technical action to bring it down. This is not a breach story, this is a business model story. And it tells us something uncomfortable about where cybercrime is heading and how easy it has become. Let's slow this down and make it very simple. No hacking jargon, no technical walkthroughs, just the logic of how this ecosystem functioned. At the end, you had an anonymous customer, not necessarily a skilled hacker, often not at all. In the middle, you had infrastructure, remote servers designed to be temporary, replaceable, and hard to trace. And on the other end, you had impact, real-world impact. Disrupted email communications, compromised accounts, financial transaction rerouted, trust broken. What made RedVDS dangerous was not sophistication, it was accessibility. This platform abstracted away complexity. It lowered the barrier to entry. It turned cybercrime into something that could be rented, not just built. Think about that for a second. If the same way cloud platforms let startups scale without owning servers, RedVDS let criminals scale fraud without owning skills. And that's the key shift. Cybercrime today is not just about attackers versus defenders. It's about ecosystems that enable abuse at scale. When infrastructure becomes disposable, accountability becomes harder. When access is cheap, experimentation explodes. And when outcomes are automated, the damage multiplies. This is why takedowns like this matter and why they are so difficult. Because you are not shutting down one actor, you are interrupting a marketplace. Up to now, we have talked about a bit what RedVDS was. Now, let's talk about how damage actually happened. Because the real story is not the platform, it's the chain reaction that it enables. What you're seeing on screen is a simplified attack flow. No technical commands, no instructions, just the logic of the abuse. And it starts quietly. A remote server comes online, nothing dramatic, no alarms. Then comes the first pivot, phishing. Mass-produced messages, email, sometimes SMS, designed to look routine, familiar, urgent. At this stage, the background is still calm, and that's intentional. Because victims don't panic yet. The real damage starts when credentials are captured. Usernames, passwords, session access. Now the attacker doesn't need to break in. They are already inside. From here, the attack simply evolves. Emails are basically read, threads are monitored, invoices are intercepted. This is where business email compromise begins. Payment instruction get subtly changed, a bank account number swapped, a sense of urgency is injected. No malware, no exploits, just trust being abused. And finally, the end of the chain, payment diversion. Money moves legitimately, intentionally, just the wrong destination. And here's the scale that matters. This was not a handful of targets. This was not a single campaign. Since late 2025, over 190,000 organizations worldwide were affected. That's the power of this model. Each step is quite simple. Each link looks harmless in isolation, but chained together, they form industrialized fraud. This is why modern cybercrime is so hard to stop, because it doesn't look like an attack until it's already succeeded. Let's get now something out of the way right now. This is not a tech industry problem, and it's definitely not a big company problem. What you're seeing on screen is the real impact footprint of platforms like RedVDS. Real estate firms, healthcare providers, legal offices, construction logistic companies, school and universities. These are organizations built on trust and routines. Invoices, contracts, medical records, tuition payments, supplier relationship, and that's exactly why they are targeted. Attackers don't need cutting-edge exploits here. They need normal business processes. A real estate escrow email, a supplier invoice in construction, a hospital admin message, a university payment reminder. Now, imagine this from the victim's side. A small business sends a payment, and it never arrives. A family wiring money for a house that suddenly vanishes. A school struggling to explain a breach they didn't even see happen. These are not abstract losses. They mean salaries delayed, legal disputes, emotional stress, reputations damaged overnight. And they happen globally. North America, Europe, Asia, not because these regions are careless, but because this model scales everywhere equally. This is what industrialized fraud looks like in practice. And once you see it this way, it becomes quite clear. Everyone is in the blast radius. Now let's talk about the part most people avoid, which is the economics. Because if this didn't work financially, it wouldn't exist, of course. So what you're seeing here is a side-by-side comparison that should make you uncomfortable. On one side, you have legitimate SaaS, software as a service. Companies raise basically funding, build products, hire staff, comply with laws, chase revenue growth. On the other side, crime as a service. No compliance, no customer support in the traditional sense, of course, no long-term brand risk, just subscriptions. This is the key insight. CaaS turns cybercrime into a rentable business model. You don't need technical skills, you don't need infrastructures, you don't even need patience, basically. You pay, you deploy, you repeat. And because everything is modular and disposable, risk is distributed. If one server goes down, another appears. If one campaign fails, 10 more launch. If one customer disappears, subscriptions continue. This is why platforms like RedVDS are so dangerous. They don't rely on genius attackers, they rely on volume. And volume is what turns small fraud into systematic damage. This is the part that should make us pause a bit, because when crime adopts the efficiency of SaaS, the asymmetry basically shifts. And defenders are no longer reacting to attackers, they are reacting to markets. And if this model was not already powerful enough, it just got a major upgrade. Up to this point, basically everything we have discussed already looks bad, but now we add one more ingredient, artificial intelligence. Platforms like RedVDS didn't operate in isolation. They were increasingly paired with AI tools, and that was a game changer. What you're seeing on screen is not science fiction, it's the convergence of automation and deception, AI-generated phishing messages. Perfect grammar, context-aware language, tailored to industries, roles, even ongoing conversations. No more dear users email, nor no more obvious mistakes. And it goes further. Voice synthesis, deepfake impersonation, executives calling finance teams, suppliers confirming payment changes. This is where fraud crosses a psychological line because humans are wired to trust, meaning familiar voices, familiar writing styles, familiar authority. AI exploits that instinct at scale. And when you combine AI-generated content with disposable infrastructure, you get something quite dangerous. High believability fraud, launched repeatedly and at almost zero marginal cost. This is why we are seeing fewer noisy attacks and more quiet ones. No alerts, no ransomware screens, just money moving in the wrong direction. This is not hacking in the traditional sense, it's industrialized manipulation. And it represents a new frontier, one where the weakest link is not software, it's again human trust. Now, this story could end in one of two ways. Either these platforms operate forever in the shadows, or eventually someone pushes back hard enough. What you're seeing here is basically the effect of that pushback. Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit, working alongside law enforcement agencies like FBI, Europol, and German authorities, didn't just block attacks. They went after the platform itself. So servers were seized, domains were taken down, infrastructure was dismantled. This mattered more than most people realize because historically, cybercrime takedowns focused on actors. This one focused on enablement. It treated RedVDS not as a collection of criminals, but as a service provider for abuse. And that sets a precedent, a powerful one, in fact. It signaled that crime as a service platforms are no longer invisible middlemen. They are becoming legally targetable entities. This is basically the David versus Goliath moment, but not in the way movies usually frame it. Here the giant is not the criminal network, it's the ecosystem. And the fight is not just technical, it's legal, financial, and geopolitical. Now, to be clear, takedowns don't end cybercrime, okay? But that basically what they do, they raise the cost. They disrupt trust between criminals. They force adaptations. And in a business model built on scale and reliability, disruption hurts. When stories like this are reported, the headline is usually about money. So millions lost, fraud totals, big numbers, but what rarely gets discussed is everything around the money. What you're seeing on screen represents broken trust. Emails that can't be trusted anymore, invoices that must be questioned, phone calls that feel suspicious by default. For individuals, this creates constant uncertainty, and for businesses, well, it creates a lot of friction. Payments slow down, processes get heavier, legal and banking systems absorb the fallout. And then there's the human side. People stressed over bills, small companies wondering if they will recover, teams blamed for mistakes they couldn't realistically prevent. This is the real cost of crime as a service, not just stolen funds, but a tax on trust that everyone pays. Security becomes more expensive, communication becomes slower, and anxiety becomes part of everyday digital life. That's the collateral damage of platforms like RedVDS. Even when they are taken down, the ripple effects stay with us. Now, there's an important part. The story is not meant to leave you feeling helpless. And I'm sorry if I did, because while these platforms scale easily, defense doesn't have to be complex. What you're seeing here are not really exotic solutions. They are quite boring, routine, but incredibly effective. multi-factor authentication, independent verification of payment requests, basic systems updates, regular phishing awareness, and reporting suspicious activity early. None of these stop cybercrime globally, of course, but together they break the economics of a fraud. They introduce friction, they slow attackers down, they force them to move on, and that's the key idea. Most attacks don't need to be defeated, they just need to become unprofitable. One extra verification step, one delayed payment, one trained employee, that's often enough to stop the chain before it completes. Defense is not about perfection, it's about making yourself a harder target than the next one. So, what does this RedVDS story really tell us in the end? Well, it tells us that cybercrime is no longer about lone attackers. It's about platforms, markets, business models. It tells us that the line between legitimate technology and abuse is getting very thinner, and that accountability is starting to catch up. It tells us something else, that trust, digital trust, is becoming one of the most valuable assets we have. Once it's gone, everything slows down. This is why stories like this matter, not because they are dramatic, but because they shape how we defend ourselves going forward. Now, if you found this breakdown useful, please give this video a like. It helps this analysis reach more people. Subscribe to the Daily Signal for more deep dive profiles like this one, and check out the Dark Profile playlist for similar stories exploring the infrastructure and the people behind modern cyber threats. Thanks for watching. I'm Max, Point Break Security, and as always, stay aware, stay curious, and stay safe.